from University of San Francisco. And for the many of you that are joining us from around the world, I want to welcome you to our fall webinar. We have really the honor today to be joined by a number of experts as a part of our autonomous vehicles and the city initiative this fall to really dialogue one of the most important topics out there, and I think one of the emerging really fertile business models in the automotive or the autonomous vehicle space, providing kind of more efficient as well as more reliable and convenient accessible service. And the notion of accessible AVs is something that, you know, our lab at University of San Francisco has been working on for a long time in partnership with the Mineta Transportation Institute, who has supported us on this. And we've been working with a couple of the companies that will be represented today for a while, just to evaluate what is happening. So before we get started, I wanted to provide some context, and then we'll jump right into our content. As we start up, I wanted to just really take the opportunity to thank both Cruise and Waymo, as well as MapTM and Space Mobilitas, that have provided us some financial support, as well as to the Masters of Public Administration program at the University of San Francisco. They allow us to do this, and they will allow us to do a big thing. In the spring, we're going to come back with our in-person conference at the Commonwealth Club this coming spring, May 3rd of 2024. So stay tuned for that and put that date on your calendar. We will send you lots of resources. But it is really a big opportunity for me to welcome Ann Foss and Daisy Wall today. Unfortunately, Michelle Lee has had a family emergency and can't make it, but we've asked her if she can join us for our spring symposium, our in-person event, and hopefully she'll be able to make it for that and tell us the amazing stuff that Cruise is doing, and kind of how they're relaunching service in the US and perhaps beyond. So welcome to all of you around the world. And I have to, maybe I could invite Ann first, and Ann leads planning and programming for the city of Arlington. I've got to know her as a part of some federal grant funding that has they've been launching in creative ways and actually doing some creative partnerships with our other guest, Daisy Wall, who is the senior director and focused on government and business strategy at May Mobility. So maybe I could give you an opportunity to start off and provide a much more robust introduction of not only who you are and what you do, but what your organization is doing in this accessible AV space. And why don't we start with you, and then we can go to Daisy.
Sure. Thanks, Billy. I'm really excited to be part of the conversation today. Thank you for pulling us together and organizing this. So like you said, I am Ann Foss. I'm the Planning and Programming Manager for the Transportation Department in the city of Arlington, Texas. So Arlington, we have a population of about 400,000 people. And then our current AV service, which is operated by May Mobility, we launched in March of 2021, and it's been operational ever since. It's fully integrated into our on-demand service. So riders can book a ride, and if the parameters of their ride meet the AV service, they're offered a choice between a human-driven microtransit van or our autonomous vehicle. And really our focus on AVs, we've had two main goals. One is testing technology in real world situations. A lot has changed since 2017 when we had our first AV pilot with the technology, with consumer acceptance, the different types of use cases and deployments that we've seen across the country and across the world. So it's been a great opportunity to kind of have a front seat for all of that has evolved. So kind of learning and testing has been a big goal. And then our second big goal has been educating our residents and visitors, knowing that autonomous technology is going most likely to become more and more prevalent in our lives. We wanted to give our residents the opportunity to kick the tires, so to speak, right? See these vehicles, ride them, learn about the technology in hopes that that will help to make people more comfortable and more accepting of the technology. So that's kind of my quick overview. Happy to get into some more details after Daisy provides her intro.
Yeah, we'll scratch the surface. Daisy, why don't you tell us a little more about what you do?
Yeah, hi. So I'm the Senior Director of Government Business at May. So I oversee business development, policy, and advocacy. So a little bit about May. I mean, it's super interesting, right? We're an autonomous vehicle company. We provide level 4 autonomy. And we focus a lot on the public transit and the public sector in generally, working directly with cities and public transit agencies to kind of help figure out how we can shape the role of autonomy innovation to make it kind of fit into the existing mobility ecosystem within cities. And I say cities, but it's also communities as well. And why I mention communities is because we also really kind of take the stance of really, autonomy innovation should be available for all. And for all means, people with different disabilities, and different abilities, right? People who are young, people who are older, and people who might live in warm environments where testing for autonomy is very favorable, and people who live in cold environments, like in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. We actually are based in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Our founder, Ed Olson, came out of the University of Michigan. He was a professor there, one of the DARPA Challenge, and he had a lot of extensive research background. But his vision really is, how do we bring it to the public to make it useful and beneficial and really provide meaningful service. And when I say meaningful service, I mean we should be in areas where it's going to make a difference, right? Providing access to transportation will make a difference, and whether that's complementing existing public transit through first mile, last mile applications, whether it's through helping out fill some of the gaps in transit deserts, or even providing supplemental, transportation for when demand is high. But it's really important for us to kind of work, directly with the city to really kind of carve out what are those areas, that make the most sense. And then also kind of strategically align with what the long-term vision of the city might look like. For some cities, it's really interesting. Some cities, it's about economic development, and others, it's about access to healthcare, or creating jobs. Others, it's how do we create better livable communities that allow people to age in place. And so we're really excited. We've launched in 12 different cities right now, where we operate on public roads, and we have accessible vehicles as well. And so I know that'll be a lot of the focus for today's webinar.
That's fantastic. And thanks, Daisy, for that overview. I'm super excited. And I want to come back to Anne, because both of you kind of implied that you were kind of looking at systems design at the same time that you're looking at automation. And so it's really grounded in the urban planning, transportation planning, civic function. And so, Anne, I'm really curious that kind of on one hand, it's kind of, you provided this framework for accessible AVs, but it's also, you said that, that you didn't really have a formalized transit system. And so it's, I'm curious, like, how did you get where you are? You're in a really unique space, and how did you get there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll try to not go too far in the weeds here, but provide some background. Okay, well, I can do the weeds.
We have an audience that loves the weeds.
Excellent. So, the mechanism for most cities to get traditional public transit is joining a transit authority or transit agency in their region. To do that, there's a financial commitment, right? Here in Texas, the way that typically works is cities dedicate a portion of their sales tax revenue that goes to one of the transit agencies. So here in the Dallas-Fort Worth region, where Arlington is located, there's 3 different transit agencies in operation. In order to dedicate that portion of sales tax and join one of those agencies, it does have to go to a public vote. So the city of Arlington, starting in the 1980s, has held 3 different votes for citizen approval to dedicate a portion of our sales tax revenue to joining a transit agency. It's been voted down all 3 times. So we haven't had that citizen level buy-in to join a transit agency and pursue traditional transit. But in 2016, our mayor and city council at the time, our elected leadership, really knew that there were transportation challenges and needs in Arlington. They wanted to figure out how can we, what are our other options besides this traditional route? So they formed an advisory committee that had about 30 different community stakeholders representing, hospitals, schools, business owners, residents, social service providers, a wide range of different folks across Arlington. That group met for a year. They heard about all the transportation needs, and then they also learned about a lot of different available transportation modes. At the end of that year, they put together a report with recommendations for the city to pursue. And the top 2 kind of shorter term recommendations were on-demand ride sharing and autonomous vehicles. So that was sort of our mandate and what we have run with. And to be honest, we get phone calls on a very regular basis from communities and transit agencies across the country who are interested in learning from what we have done here. I think the AV use case and the microtransit or on-demand rideshare use case are really valuable in low density areas where fixed route just doesn't have the population to support it necessarily, potentially in more rural areas, those transit deserts that Daisy mentioned. And they can also be used kind of to fill in the gaps between existing fixed route or used as their own systems, standalone. So that's kind of how we got to where we are. And it's been pretty successful. We've been able to use federal funding to help pay for our services, which is also something that we get questions about because the funding challenge is real for all of us. Happy to talk about that too, if we want to get into that.
I think that would be great, but I want to hear from Daisy a little bit on this. I mean, because I think it's perhaps, there are many different use cases you talked about, and this is just one of them. How do we get there? I mean, how hard is it to get to where Anne is?
Yeah, I mean, it's a collaboration, right? In terms of what we look at. Obviously, if you look at kind of the autonomy trajectory in terms of technological development, it's iterative process. I mean, Anne can probably, attest to the fact when we launched in day 1, like the day right after, COVID officially became COVID, worldwide, if you will, our autonomy was at one level, right? And then today, the autonomy is at a completely different level than it was when we first launched. So it is an iterative process. And the key is kind of working with a city and a transit agency and asking, okay, what are your goals? What are your long-term goals for this year? What are they for the future? Mm-hmm. How will we find additional funding, after whatever mm-hmm. this prove out phase is, which a lot of cities and transit agencies want to go through a prove out phase, and that's okay too. And then figure out, from there, is there a vision for autonomy in the city? And there's a concept that we talk a lot here at May. It's called an autonomy hub, and really what it is, it's an extension of a mobility hub, where you have different modes of transportation and you want to give riders an option to choose the best mode possible. Where does autonomy fit in? Our particular business model is more geared around AV microtransit, as Anne was saying. So it's more on demand. You can pull up the service, you can book an accessible autonomous vehicle or a non-accessible autonomous vehicle, depending on your needs, and it saves profiles and everything. And then you go from there. Now, from our perspective, we do have a predefined, right, and operational design domain or a service area. So it's a little different than saying, here's the city, and kind of go wherever. We worked with Anne to figure out where is the locations that make the most sense for us. What are the service hours that make the most sense for us? What are the different types of populations and preferred stop points, that we want to kind of make sure that the autonomous vehicles goes to. so that we can create that service. And then we're always iterating. You know, Anne might feel like, wait a minute, you know, during this, we need to extend the service hour a little bit because we're finding more people want to ride, right? And during this time, and let's do that. So it's super collaborative, I think, and very iterative, and it has to be, because we know that city dynamics change, right? You know, construction times change, right? You know, weather conditions change, all of those things. So we just have to try to be as lockstep as possible.
Well, I think, you know, we've seen a lot of that dialogue on changes in operational design domain and changes in weather really influencing the current dialogue right now. And I want to acknowledge too that we've started this conversation really grounded in this idea of how shared mobility can bolster the transit function in cities. And I think that's something that I have to acknowledge. I've been working a lot with UITP and the Shared Mobility Committee and the Autonomous Vehicle Working Group. And this is there's a lot of interest, and I think a lot of the folks that are online today are really interested in how do we support core high capacity transit. And one of the projects that I'll say that Ann and I we worked on, one of the projects that was similarly funded by the Department of Transportation, federal. I'm not sure if it was FHWA, Ann, or if it was actually another genre. But I think the idea is that we can bolster and strengthen core routes even in communities that they're different than yours, Ann. And I'm curious, if we can maybe just like roundtable. Is there kind of a vision in the communities maybe that you work in, Daisy, where there's this idea of complementary service that then boosts ridership and really creates this transit backbone?
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is probably, I would say probably 90%, I mean, maybe 85 for the percent of our conversations. There's always that element to it. And we really encourage, transit agencies and cities to look, if fixed route is running really well, you're getting a lot of passengers, it's meeting your demand, keep it. It's like the best, if you think about it, it's like the best form of transportation. You want to be able to encourage that, but it's those connections, into those fixed routes, or there are areas where through some sort of, network redesign or something like that, you might have pockets of people who get left behind, and it's difficult. I mean, transit is a very difficult position, in the sense that, last year, right, 3 out of 4 transit agencies had to cut some sort of service. It might have been small, it might have been large. And that's, you have to ask the question, what happens to the people who are left behind? And a lot of them, and I want to tie it back into accessibility a little bit here too. A lot of them are, seniors and people with disabilities. And unfortunately, and in cities, absolutely, but especially in rural areas where they already have limited means of transportation. And it's, and on the topic of accessibility, it's really interesting. And Anne's very familiar with this as well. Another example of a community like in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, for example, it's a town of 11,000 people. So a tiny little town in Minnesota, very cold, obviously. And amazingly, our ridership, over 50% are seniors. We kind of fluctuate between 15% and somewhere up to 30% of our riders actually are people who use wheelchairs or are people with disabilities, which is, if you think about it, that's an overrepresentation. We have 5 vehicles running there. 3 of them are accessible with ADA compliant wheelchair accessible ramps. And we were super excited to see that. And the reason is, I still think we, as an industry, and May included, we all need to do a better job just generally of putting more and more features that help with rider experience in the realm of making sure it's more inclusive and accessible. But the fact of the matter is that community needed transportation. And so if we can kind of look for areas first of where there is a need, and then go in and say, how do we fulfill that need? I actually really think that's the future of autonomy, is that the community drives, where autonomy goes, if you will, and the community will drive where commercialization, will happen as well. And I, and I think, we were excited. That was initially a Minnesota DOT sponsored project. Then we were able to actually, we're very fortunate that we got an Attain grant, a grant that was put out. And so we have 3 more years on top of that. And I think it's based on the success of the first 18 months that we did, and two, we talked about the preliminary launch of the program. The North Central Texas Council of Governments also saw the success of it and continue to fund it. So if you think about it, these 2 autonomous vehicle, microtransit programs are the longest running programs that have been around at this point, because a lot of them have been more 6-month, one year pilots, where these are actually in service on public roads, up to 35 miles an hour, if you will, and picking up passengers, in 8-hour, 12-hour days, which is very similar to how public transit would run.
That's great. That's great. And sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no. So I mean, the use case here in Arlington is different from the one that Daisy was just describing up in Grand Rapids. But I think that point about how AVs can plug in to supplement existing transit or meet that latent demand that you have, if you can identify what that is. And so the way ours operates, it serves on and around the University of Texas at Arlington campus. So I think there's close to 50,000 students taking classes, lots of movement across campus, but also on and off campus to housing and other destinations. And so by offering the AV service in the most dense part of Arlington, where we have the most demand for these shorter trips, it frees up our citywide on-demand service to be able to, have more capacity to provide the longer trips and reach the, outlying areas of the city. So, that was something really gratifying that we found after we launched the services. There was that latent demand for those short trips. Lots of UTA students who are definitely early adopters of the AV technology. We have always had an accessible AV as part of our fleet. We have given very, very few wheelchair rides. So different story. And so that's one of the things I was thinking about before our discussion today. What are the opportunities to grow in that area? What are some of the challenges? City of Arlington does operate an elderly and disabled kind of more traditional dial-a-ride paratransit service that's been operational for decades. And so I think in some cases, the population who has those accessibility challenges, they have their solution. And that's what they've been doing for a while. And that's kind of what they're comfortable with and what they want to stick with, right? But we have the same challenges that many paratransit services have, right? Like we have more demand than we can supply. People always are interested in expanded service hours. Labor shortages are a challenge for us, making sure we have enough drivers to keep our buses running and full. I think there's a lot of opportunities for autonomy to help with some of those challenges. But I think, as I start to think about that more and more, I want to make sure that we're not replicating current challenges with a new mode, right? And so how can we fix the current challenges that we have with accessible transit? Because we all know that there's a lot of challenges in the services that we currently have in place. So how can we be very cautious and deliberate about how AV can address those challenges and improve service for those who need it?
I want to come back and tap down on the challenges, because I think that's what we kind of have a solutions oriented lab here, and like we want to talk more about those and how we can learn together. But also there are 2 things you said that I really want to underscore. I for the audience here, is that we've always had an accessible AV. I mean, and that is a new message, right? Like this idea that this is something that's real. And I think I want to underscore it for everybody here, because you're doing something special, and it's no wonder that we want to learn from you and others want to learn from you. And I think, Daisy, I'm sure there's other examples that you can cite, but there's other thing I want to really underscore for folks, the other words you use, because in transportation planning, we never emphasize it enough, which is this idea of latent demand. And, particularly transportation agencies sometimes talk a lot about induced demand in terms of trying to get people out of cars without thinking about the options we're giving, particularly to the highest cost, highest need populations in our cities. And we found the same thing in our lab in some of the preliminary work we did with University of San Francisco students and members of the general public who were riding in Cruise robotaxis, and they were using it to complement and supplement public transportation during off-peak hours. So I think I would just underscore that and say there's a growing body of literature that shows that this really can be a win-win for transit, but it's not without challenges. So, maybe we can talk about perhaps a little bit of a surprise. Daisy, what are some of the things that you're thinking about in terms of challenges on the vehicular side that you are working to solve? And then maybe, Anne, if you could complement that with some of the additional operational challenges that are just totally top of mind for you, and then we can take a positivist approach to that. But I think let's really focus on what are the pinch points here.
Yeah, well, no, absolutely. And take a quick step back. What May does is we provide, we're the developers, right, of the technology. So we provide the software and the hardware that goes on the vehicle. So that's us. We have fantastic partners in Toyota. We do use a shared ride type of model. So it's a Toyota Sienna vehicle that we're using right now. It's rear loading in terms of wheelchairs. So that's kind of one already, right? Some of you here are very familiar with ADA, is that some folks would prefer the side loading, rather than the rear loading. And actually some communities like rear loading more than side loading. And I can give some examples of that. So when you look at vehicles, for us, it's kind of, one, it has to be shared ride. For us, that's a commitment for us. Sustainability is important if we're going to create cleaner cities, right? And reduce, congestion. So shared is important. So that means that we're always striving to kind of figure out, okay, how do we get more riders in a vehicle, right? Obviously, safety, having safety redundancy features, because we're level 4 autonomy, when we want to have the drive-by-wire built into the platform. So you have that extra safety redundancies, and rather than doing a retrofit. I know I'm getting a little techie here, so I won't go too far into that.
Go for it. We got a techie audience here.
So if you have the techie audience, you know what I'm talking about. Then that's kind of number 2, right? 3 is kind of like, is there configurability, within the vehicle for us to kind of figure out, how do we make it a best fit for what we're looking for? For now, we have the Sienna. It's a fantastic, a fantastic form factor, for AV microtransit. It fits 5 people. We can get 1 wheelchair in there with 2 additional seats for caregivers. And in the event that that vehicle isn't being used, we can, flip it over and actually fit 4 people in the vehicle. But as we're designing and looking at how does it look like to, for a driverless vehicle and a fully autonomous vehicle. When I say fully, I mean without a safety operator. Right now, because we receive so many federal, grants or funding, we do have a safety operator in there, as part of our federal grants. Now, that being said, we're also looking at opportunities, for how do we create the best experience possible, right, for everyone, and how can we add on to the in-cabin experience to make sure that those vehicles are maximized for the best comfort and then also convenience and safety of the riders, right? And so an example of that is really having those open communications with the OEM. We were very fortunate. We worked on actually a USDOT sponsored inclusive design challenge. And that was what kind of led us to create the accessible vehicle that Anne is using today. We went into the challenge, we worked with USDOT and Ronability and UMTRI to find a way to convert the Sienna to have that, right? Now, is it perfect? No, but it is, ADA compliant, which we're happy about, right? And it was pretty much in short order. We did the challenge, we developed the prototype, and then we rolled it in. And Toyota was amazing in that, yes, they felt it was important, and so they incorporated it in. But then there's all these other technologies that we're trying to figure out too. For example, cabin awareness, features. If someone with epilepsy or a pre-existing heart condition, is there a way to detect when someone stops breathing, or detect, when someone, heartbeat is a bit off, right? And so those things are all, for me, that's kind of exciting, but still a challenge, is how do you fit all that into the vehicle, and when, and how does that, kind of play into the product roadmap, if you will. And so it's an iterative process. And I have to say this, like, the more we learn and the more we're out there in Arlington and Ann Arbor and, in Arizona and Minnesota, all the other places, we're learning more and more. And as we're learning directly from the rider, then we start incorporating those in. But I think it's important to actually be sure that we're serving all the riders and all the different demographics, because if we don't, we won't know what needs to go into the vehicle.
And Daisy, and Anna, I would love to hear from you on this too, but before we move on, I'd really love to hear kind of a visual delineation of like what the experience is for the passenger in these vehicles. And particularly, one of the things we hear about in a lot of shared mobility forums for accessible riders, how often do they need assistance in the vehicle? Is this by and large, are they able to navigate getting into the vehicle themselves? And I know that's been a tension, at least when I've worked on this before, is how often can it be a ride that's by themselves? And so maybe we can both follow up on that.
Yeah, and maybe you can provide the experience, in Arlington, and I can add some color of what's today, and then give you a glimpse, a little bit of like what's tomorrow and some of the things that we're looking at.
Yeah, so I mean, we've seen big improvements just over the 2.5 years of our deployment with May Mobility. Our first accessible vehicle was a Polaris Gem. It could only hold the one wheelchair passenger. It was not the same form factor as the rides that other riders were taking, and that was a piece of feedback that we got, that having I book a ride and this little sort of electric kind of souped up golf cart shows up, and a friend of mine who's not in a wheelchair books a ride, and an Lexus SUV shows up for them. Like, that was a challenge and a pain point for sure. So now that we've made the switch to Toyota Sienna for our entire fleet, it's the same form factor for all riders, regardless of their need. So that's a huge improvement. We were able to invite wheelchair users out to ride the Polaris Gem and get their feedback. And even just simple things like having a grab bar that's easy to reach when you're in the vehicle, because you're strapped down, you're not going anywhere, but having that ability to hold on and feel more secure was really important. So, we don't have issues with cold weather here in Texas. We have issues with hot weather. So robust air conditioning and making sure that the passengers are staying cool and comfortable while they're riding is also some of the feedback we got that's really important. So, we've seen those improvements. From an operational perspective, I think the thing that keeps me up at night is, how do we make that transition to not having a safety operator on board? I think for the general public, there's a lot of questions and a lot of education and a lot of messaging and reassuring that's going to go into that process. But especially for the community of folks with disabilities, there a lot of riders still need assistance getting in and out of the vehicle. There's assistance with securement. If you have gone grocery shopping and you've got bags, right now our paratransit service, the drivers will carry grocery bags to your door and set them inside, your house for you. So there's some of those types of kind of rider experience, rider support that still needs to be figured out. And then there's some technical issues too. Our current service with May Mobility, it functions as an on-demand service, but in the background, we do have a defined route network. We do have defined stop locations, and we have a lot of them across our service area. So no matter where you book your ride, there's always one within a block or two. But we can't guarantee a door-to-door service with our AV service right now. And those stop locations were chosen carefully to make sure that we weren't blocking traffic, that there was room to deploy the ramp, there were curb cuts, all those types of things to make the stop accessible. But for folks who can't do that 1 to 2 block walk or roll, how do we, the technology still needs to improve to get to the point where we can do door to door. So those are some of the operational challenges that are top of mind for me.
fascinating. Daisy, anything else that you're finding as an additional challenge? Or
Yeah, I think Anne actually covered a lot of that too. And it's interesting, right? Because, if you look at it, you have almost it's kind of the service model, if you will. You have fixed route, you get the most efficiencies, right? And the greatest gains on that front. You have door to door, you get the most personalized service. Ours is kind of somewhere in between, right? And we're kind of like a hybrid, right? Point to point. So what we were trying to do is get some gains and efficiencies, right, from a shared perspective, while providing some personalization. And to Anne's point is, and this is where the demand and the technology need to kind of move in sync. I know keep on going back to Minnesota, but it's just an interesting situation where, Minnesota, we have a fairly tight, radius, but then we also have 70 different stop points, because we understand that, people with disabilities or seniors don't want to go very far between stops. So we made that deliberate, decision to actually do that, to help, those particular riders. So every community is a little different. I mean, the other thing, I think it's just like anything else. If you're looking at accessibility, you have to kind of look a lot. And I know we're talking a lot about wheelchairs, but we're really looking at other areas. For example, passenger screens. We're implementing some new features and functionalities into vehicles where you can actually see, the ride, and then also see how the autonomy works, as you're going. So it's kind of an educational tool as well. But, even the small things like, okay, if you see the vehicle and see all the other vehicles next to it, if someone is colorblind, do all the colors match with that, right? When we're looking at, if you're going to remove the safety operator, for example, or the autonomous vehicle operator, which we call MA, if you push a button, can we make sure that those buttons have braille on them, right? So that, the start, SOS, call, help, stops, all of those things that, that's built in, audio cues, those are really important, to have. And we're layering all of those things in. We can't always get them in at one time, but we're gradually introducing, those in. And I say gradually, I mean, like quarter over quarter. So it's pretty fast, every like 3 to 6 months, there's something new that we're seeing that's coming in to kind of help with some of those and bridge some of those gaps. So that's kind of what I get excited about, but it's still, I want to see it happen faster. Everyone does. And so that to me, it's still a challenge. Is that how do we get things done faster? In a way that meets kind of all our needs and helps create a good, rider experience.
I want to kind of maybe dial into on something that's kind of clearly like a challenge sometimes is when you have disengagements or you have service that perhaps is slower than people expect. And then the worst case situation is you have a situation that's hard to message. And if we follow the news over the last 6 months, particularly with crews, they've been in some situations that are like particularly hard to articulate some of the situations the vehicle has encountered. And then of course, with October 2nd event, which is like the 1 in a million situation where you have a crazy unfortunate event where, they're stepping back and reevaluating and getting ready to relaunch. But how do you message, one of the thorny things about automation is how do you message when you have these to your public about educating them about the safety attributes, but when you have these incidents, and I think it varies on your state policy, but one of the things we've been giving a lot of thought to, and I was just talking to the UITP AV working group about, is just kind of to whom does the messaging go, and how do you not end up in these media sensationalized dialogues that necessarily aren't reflective of the on the ground situation that occurs. So I don't know. I mean, Anne, have you had anything occur? And Davey, I'm sure you've had instances where you're on PR 911. So I mean, what is the best practice in kind of the automated shuttle world on that?
I think it'd be really interesting to hear from Anne on this, and I can add a little color, because Anne, I think it has, from a relationship standpoint and giving people heads up on things and proactive communications is key. So I don't know, Anne, if you want to maybe talk, because obviously, yeah, I mean, just like transit, if you're operating every day, long hours, and whatnot, things happen. And so maybe Anne could shed a little light on that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'll say first and foremost, we've been very fortunate with our AV service that we haven't had any serious incidents or crashes that we've had to deal with. So, knock wood. We've been the focus on safety, I think, has really paid off. I think my biggest answer to this question is the partnership. And so I think the fact that we have always worked really closely with our AV providers has made it easier for us to, like we're in control of the deployment area and the operating hours and the messaging and all of that. And so this, the city has been very, very hands-on, and that's been the expectation from our city leadership, is that we are hands-on. And I like to joke that we're probably like the neediest customers for VIA and May Mobility, because we ask all the questions and we want to see all the data, and we really want to know what's going on and how we can improve the service, not just the AV side of it, but the rider experience and, all of those things. So I think that partnership is key. I think trying to, engage the community as broadly as possible, which for all the planners out there, how hard it is to do good community engagement. And we send out so much information across many different channels, and we still have people who, 6 years after we launched our on-demand rideshare service, I still go to public meetings and people are like, oh, we have public transportation? That I never knew that, so getting the information out is challenging, but I think making it available, we've got a website with lots of FAQs that address the safety questions and concerns and things like that. We've also done a lot of ridership surveys and getting feedback, and then we've been able to respond to that feedback kind of in real time. Like, let's tweak our service hours to meet the demand, or let's we're getting lots of questions about a certain feature of the autonomy. Let's make sure that the operators in the vehicle are being proactive about talking to riders about that and how it's working. So partnerships and getting out in front of the message have been successful for us.
Yeah, I think we have a question about user feedback too. So I think it really underscores that idea of listening to your customer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Anne.
No, I was going to respond to the specific question was, how does the automated vehicle compare to the human-driven vehicle in terms of user feedback? So a few different metrics we can look at. Kind of the easiest one, every time you take a ride, if you book through the app for either the human-driven or the AV, you get the option to rate your ride kind of on a scale of 1 to 5 stars. We've got high rider satisfaction on that metric for both services, but we are higher for the AV. So consistently scoring a little bit higher on rider satisfaction for the autonomous vehicle rides. So that's one easy metric.
Yeah. For I think for us, it's kind of to your point, Billy. I think you mentioned that really staying in sync with the purpose of the service is really important. Doing that community outreach, I mean, all transit agencies do this every day. And I think sometimes, people don't always recognize it, because when AV companies start doing it, it becomes, unique. It's really not unique. It's what transit, and transportation professionals do every day and should be doing, is really understanding and getting the community involved and helping kind of design their service. Really, that's what we're trying to do for them, right? And so I think one of the things that we found in our early days, just like other companies, we don't know, we learn, going in and saying, oh, well, this community, we think that they need to be running, Monday through Friday, this time and this time. And, we kind of presume that's the case. And we've had multiple circumstances where we've gone in and started talking to people, and they're like, no, actually, we don't care about this day. We would rather have Sunday service because people need to get to church. And we're like, okay, we need to readjust, remap, like whatever it is we need to do, we need to kind of step back and do it. And we found out the hard way then, but the next time we're like, okay, we can't do anything yet. Let's talk to the community first, and then start doing the mapping, then start doing the planning and the stop location. So we learned fast, right? That the first way wasn't the way to do it. And another great example, we're working with the city of Detroit right now on a program to launch, autonomous vehicles for people who are 65 and older, and people with disabilities in a service area, and we're looking at that right now. But even a presumption, and this was on the ground true, is that we thought, okay, there's a large grocery store that we thought everybody's going to want to go to, right? Because it's the grocery store in the area. And we came in and we thought we need a stop location here. And we had seniors and people with disabilities look at us and say, no, actually, we would prefer to go this little tiny mom and pop store here. And we couldn't figure out why. Obviously you would think that, there's less choice of merchandise and all of that. And they said it's because, and this is kind of the irony of it, right? It's because that big grocery store has a self-checkout. And they actually prefer, to have somebody there, that will help them bag their groceries, do all those things for them. That's what's the irony of it. It's like autonomy,
I
right?
can't agree more.
There you go, right? And so we had thought, and if we had not talked to the community, we would have gotten that whole stop location wrong. And then people would have been disenfranchised and not been able to get their groceries, which is one of the goals, is to make sure people are, enhancing quality of life. And we would have missed that whole opportunity. And so those are the types of nuances that come out with these types of discussions. When Anne, early days, you had a female basketball team, right? Come out.
Yeah, the wheelchair basketball team.
Wheelchair basketball team, and to take rides. And, they had commented, right, and on Headspace. And things like that. There's these nuances that come out that we can't think of because we're not in their shoes. And so those things are super important. But it's very lengthy. It takes a lot, a lot of time, a lot of commitment, a lot of people, a lot of collaboration, but it's so worth it.
Yeah, I think we had a question about use cases that required more human support. And we've talked about a couple of use cases, but Anne, is there a use case? You mentioned the grocery use case. Is there a predominant use case you see that requires that usually requires intervention?
Yeah, I think for a lot of folks, they do still need assistance boarding. In addition to the groceries or other kind of essential goods that people are trying to get home with. So yeah, there's definitely still opportunities for growth.
Cool.
I was reading news this morning about humanoid robots that are being developed. And so, maybe we have the autonomous vehicle with a humanoid robot attendant in it who can help carry groceries to the door.
It's as long as it's emotionally intelligent, I'm going to be okay with that.
Yeah.
But so, and then kind of, we have another question regarding, and then I want to pivot to something that Dan Carforo brought up, which is related to business models, because I think that's really important, and the economics are really important. But what about, Daisy, what about inclement weather? You're in a lot of snowy environments, and I think we know there's actually a lot of experiments with similar platforms happening in Northern European countries as well. So this is not an anomaly, but kind of any low-hanging fruit in terms of vehicular operations in snow that are in the inclement weather that we need to be aware of?
Yeah. A couple of things. And first and foremost, like, every community has something that's a little different that you have to kind of be there and operate to really understand, right? If you come to Michigan, you'll see geese. Geese are walking around on the road, all the time. If you go to certain parts, there might be flocks of bird migrations, right? In other areas, in Grand Rapids, for example, we launched, I think it was one of the worst blizzards in the history of Minnesota the year that we launched, and our vehicle was not familiar with 10-foot snowbanks. Initially when we launched, I can say that, it was struggling. It's like, well, what is a 10-foot snowbank? But again, because we're serving as part of an extension of public transit, Billy, and maybe this is where I think it may not be as a big issue for us, is that we want to make sure that we're in autonomy as much as possible. However, we prioritize, we always say, like, accessibility, safety, mobility, customer experience is first, and autonomy is a facilitator. So if there's a situation where we have to choose, we're going to over-index on those first four things, right? And so the good news is that we were okay driving for a bit, in more manual when we first launched. And then now, like, I just saw a stat, now we're in autonomy, like, close to 90%, of the time. But that's because the technology developed and had the understanding of that too. Another interesting thing, rural areas with snow is another one, right? Because you need the localization component, and and so how do you solve for that in Minnesota in rural areas? I think I saw a question in the chat there about how does this work in rural areas, right? The Minnesota program is quite interesting. We actually partnered with the local high school because one of the other areas that we're really interested in as a company is workforce development. And so we partnered with a local high school in their STEM program. They actually ended up designing these like pylars, which basically are, think of it almost like if you go hiking and you see the signs, like go this way and that way. We were able on long stretches where there's no area of localization to put those pylars there that were designed by the high school kids, at the local high school, and put them on the road so that we could localize off of those. And so I thought that was brilliant. It was a very low tech way to solve a high tech, challenge. But I know, Anne, you had a great example of like birdhouses. I think that's a great
Yes.
idea. That's a great story to share with this audience.
Yeah, our first AV deployment with Easy Mile vehicles, we had the same challenge. No, you need fixed vertical objects that the LiDAR can see to localize off of. And we were operating basically in a city park on pedestrian bicycle trails and didn't have any buildings nearby. So we bought a bunch of birdhouses from Home Depot and put them on tall poles along the route, and that solves that problem. Just quickly on the inclement weather question, obviously we don't have snowbank issues in Texas. We do usually once a winter have ice storms, and those are challenging for everybody. So, the climate here is that if there's ice on the ground, everything shuts down. But the other big challenge we have is with rain. So we get really hard, heavy downpours, and then there'll be lots of water on the street, and that poses a challenge for the AVs. The sensors aren't sure how to read that standing water. So that's another kind of weather condition that we're still working on.
Yeah, and I want to, part of what I'm glad you all emphasized that, and Daisy, I'm super happy that you kind of emphasize that you're over indexing for safety. And I want to acknowledge that. I think I've worked with a lot of companies in this space, and our lab works with a lot of companies they're doing comparable stuff. And I do think there's a lot of that is best practice. And we do see that the operational design domain is becoming increasingly important to design that threshold at which vehicles will cease operations because it is unsafe. And I talk a lot, and I've been talking a lot to educate folks in the media that will vehicles ever be able to drive all the time, 100% of the time? And the simple answer is no, because do humans drive all the time? And is it safe for humans to drive all the time? Absolutely no. So, I was suggesting earlier this morning that we need to have some FAQs that don't hold our robot cars to a higher standard than human driving. But I do think this is an important thing, that we know that when these ODD thresholds, we can still deliver a great public transit service. And it sounds like with the system design that you all are working on, that is still a possibility. So can we just do one more? I really want to kind of unpack or just hear from you as we conclude, is just, and I want to keep us to our time, because I think we could just talk for hours as a group, and we might have to revisit this conversation, because there's a lot here, and I think there's a lot of interest in this topic as a business model. And I think one of the questions that's come out, and I'll say for our audience, is if we don't get to your question, email us. I'm assuming that both Anne and Daisy are welcome to email and email me, and we will help get a great answer for you if we don't know it ourselves. But what do we see as the future of really driving down? I think some of the promise of these automated vehicles is we can potentially drive down costs. But a lot of the companies, and congratulations on the recent capital raise, Daisy, that May Mobility did. It's great that we see more money and more OEM partnerships to advance this technology. Yeah. But the more capital that goes into this, the longer the return on investment in that capital. And so how do we make sure that we are still providing, the most financially competitive rides to the consumer. And I think I'm always struggling with this idea of what is the business model that is transit light or transit-ish. So maybe we could just spend a little time on that, and it probably will yield more questions than answers, and I'm fine with that. But
Yeah.
I don't know who wants to start. Daisy, you want to jump right in?
Yeah, I mean, it's evolving, right, Billy? I mean, obviously, I think, we have an interesting model, and I think it's unlike maybe some of our, other peer, industry leaders here as well. And we love their model too, because from our perspective, it's mobility for all, right? And different people need different things at different times. You're going to need an Uber, you're going to need a robo-taxi at certain times of the day. But for us, and it's just how we kind of grew out of it, in the sense that, we want to make sure we can get to as many communities as possible. And sometimes that community may not be able to afford it. And so if that's the case, we do, lean on, on the state or the municipality or the federal government to help, kind of bridge some of those gaps. What I'd love to see more of is that, and I'm sure the federal government would like to, is how do you kind of wean off of that, right? And have more of a sustainable mix of funding from like a public-private partnership, and then maybe, kind of a multi-dimensional or a multi-pronged subsidy where it could be partially federal, partially state, and some communities it's state tax, other communities, whatever it happens to be. Other communities, sometimes it's real estate developers. We've had that too. And in Ann Arbor, we've had real estate developers come in and be like, this is a benefit. We want to design, a sustainable, livable community. And then maybe in some cases, it's rider contribution. But is there a way to find that right mix in order to make it affordable for all? Because if it's not affordable, then we're back to where we were before, square one, is that then the equity issue becomes an issue. And then people with disabilities and seniors, or low income individuals become, become edged out of the innovation. And so that's kind of part one. The second thing is that I guess we need to provide value. I don't know how else to say it, but if we're providing service to people to get to, to point A to point B, whether it's to school, like in, Ann's community, it's to a social event or a health appointment, like, we're looking at in Detroit, then it's a win, and I feel like sometimes that measurement, I hope that we start to measure the impacts of autonomy in other ways other than maybe ridership or, cool, or whatever it is. I feel like we've started in, cool, then it was like, oh, how many riders are you getting? And then how are you making money? All of those, I feel like it's a bit of an evolution, but then at the end of the day, what you really want to do is go down to the individual person, and what difference is it making to the individual person or the person that they might be relying on to provide transportation trips. So that's kind of
I think
how we're thinking about it. Yeah.
One of the things that I think I'll add to is that, from my guess is the person that kind of asked the question about and alluded to the high cost of rides is really looking at some of these first generation development models that are the robo-taxi model. And one of the things that we talk a lot about in our research at University of San Francisco is this idea is as you move to multi-passenger vehicles, you're really maximizing people miles traveled or people kilometers traveled, and you're maximizing revenue because you have more people in those vehicles. So from a private sector standpoint, I like to tell people that May Mobility, for example, has no interest in wasted VMT on the network because that's a loss. But also, they have a strong interest in seeing more passengers per vehicle, which benefits the city as well as the company. So and I'm sorry, I just had to chime in there, but hopefully, I'm trying to broker this public-private thing here.
Yeah. No, I think that's on point. The only other thing that I'll add quickly, because I know we're at time, is if we're providing this as public transit, all public transit is heavily subsidized, right? So I don't know that it's necessarily a fair metric to say that AVs need to pay for themselves or have a business model where they're revenue neutral, right? Like, or making money. No public transit system makes money. So I think it comes back to that decision of, do you want to provide accessibility for the people who need it the most in your community? And if you do, it's going to be subsidized in some form or fashion.
I think you basically just dropped the mic for us with your last simple statement that is really on point. So I think what I want to do is kind of make that a point where I can thank you both for providing your expertise and a small slice of, I'm sure, your busy workday. And thank you for kind of making this a super rich conversation. As an educational institution, we have a lot of students that are on the line, and then we'll watch this afterwards. And so I always like to end with kind of you as senior professionals and senior women in your industry, and one that is predominantly dominated by men. Do you have any advice for young people looking at planning careers, but also looking at engineering careers and interested in transportation? I think that's a good way to cap us off today, maybe with a final word.
Anne, do you want to go first?
Sure. My advice for anybody who's interested in planning or transportation fields is, well, a couple of things. You need thick skin, right? You're going to hear from people who hate what you're doing for all the different reasons, right? Like, there's people who hate me for providing public transit. There's people who hate me for not providing enough public transit. So no matter what you're doing, there's going to be people who aren't happy with it. So thick skin is critical. And then the other thing is, you've got to have, especially working in local government, you've got to have patience and kind of a long-term view, right? You're not going to change the world 6 months out of school or 1 year into your first job. And a lot of days feel like it's 1 step forward, 3 steps back, right? But if you take that long view and over the span of your career, you will make meaningful change in people's day-to-day lives. And so that's what keeps me going on the days that seem more challenging.
Wonderful advice.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I would say, transportation and AV technology too. So I have to represent a little bit of both, right? Technology and transportation. I think it's just such a rewarding area to go into. You'll never be out of a job because there's a transportation needs in every single community all over the world. Actually, not just, I was going to say US, but it's actually all over the world, right? And it's if you're someone who likes holistic thinking and divergent thinking and problem solving, it's wonderful because you'll never be bored. There's always a new problem to kind of address. And then you don't always have to, I've found that you don't always have to come to especially for women, and I'm good because you brought it up, Billy, I think sometimes women feel like you have to have the perfect, like you've got to match every single requirement, in order to apply for something and all of that. And really, I find like the best transportation people I've met come from such a diverse array of backgrounds. They're previous drivers who've kind of grown into into the industry and have really succeeded and come to leadership positions. I work at a very I'm like everybody I feel like at May is super smart and has PhDs and all of that. I am not. I'm a sociologist, and my interest is like, how do we intersect technology with social impacts and make sure that technology is benefiting society, right? Probably not, something you think about. I know Anne's got an urban planning background because you knew like what you wanted to do, Anne. That was your calling.
It
right?
took a while to get there, though.
But I guess what I'm saying, we have data scientists, perception people. We've got so many different people who come from different backgrounds. And so what I love about transportation is just that every day is different. If you love problem solving, it's definitely right for you. And agree with Anne, hang in there, but it's a great way to think about you're leaving a legacy, right? For the next generation, whatever you do, you're leaving a legacy. And if you think about it long-term like that, it's pretty cool.
That's fantastic. And I will compliment that with just kind of one thing that I've been reflecting on is this idea of leading with confidence, but not attitude. And so being a leader and leaning in and not being afraid to speak truth to power, but also doing it with empathy. And so I think that's consistent with what both Daisy and Anne just relayed. But I wanted to take a moment just for everyone, again, to thank Daisy and Anne. This has been one of the most enjoyable conversations that we've ever had as a part of this Automated Vehicles in the City symposium that we run. And to remind folks that we will be back in person at the Commonwealth Club in spring, and hopefully we can get you two to come out and join us for that as well. And I think there's a lot of people that are interested in this conversation and this use case for automation. And then, again, thanks. Particularly when we put the online conference on, our sponsorship really helps. We have Cruise, Waymo, MapTM out of the Netherlands, Space Mobility out of Belgium, that have all helped us and will contribute to us putting on this event at the Commonwealth Club on May 3rd of 2024. So we will see you then as well. But again, thanks for all of you that attended. Thank you so much. For everybody who asked questions, hopefully we answered them, and if we didn't, just reach out. And again, thank you, Daisy, and we will see you soon.
Thanks so much, folks. Billy. Thanks, everyone.
Happy holidays.
Thanks, Billy. Thanks, Daisy. I enjoyed it.
Same here. Bye-bye.